How do we make ourselves miserable? We have all the resources in the world at our fingertips. The Stoics would look at us and say we're a pampered generation, we're a very lucky generation. So how do we go around making ourselves miserable when we have it so good? Well, what the Stoics are saying is that there's two main ways that we do this. And the first one is by chasing after things that are up to fate or fortune. They would call this fate worse than death, chasing after things that are up to fate or fortune. Now, this could be because we're ambitious, right? This could be because we want to become rich or famous or get a certain job or find a certain person. It could be for any number of reasons, but it's chasing something that's outside of our control. And this was a big point for the Stoics. They believed that there were some things that were up to us and there were other things that were not up to us. And if we chase after the things that are not up to us, then we're going to be miserable. Marcus Aurelius says in Meditations, he says, "You control your thoughts, actions, and words. Everything else is incidental." So it doesn't matter whether you're an executive or an artist or a writer or a student, whatever your situation, everything else is incidental. You can't control the economy, you can't control other people, you can't control external circumstances. But what you can control is your response to those circumstances. So instead of chasing after these things that are up to fate or fortune, what the Stoics would say is focus on what's in your control, right? Focus on being the best version of yourself. Focus on doing your craft well. Focus on living in accordance with nature. Focus on being a good person, treating others well. These are things that are up to us. And if we focus on these things rather than on the things that are up to fate or fortune, then we'll be much happier. So the Stoics said that there are two ways that we make ourselves miserable. First, it's chasing after things that are up to fate or fortune. Second way that we make ourselves miserable is by resisting things that are also up to fate or fortune. What they would say is this: if you resist things that are up to fate or fortune, you will be miserable. So think about this for a second. We have very little control over many things that are happening in our lives. So what do? Well, we resist, right? We resist the traffic, we resist the rain, we resist the snow, we resist getting older, we resist people, we resist things changing, we resist anything that's happening that we don't want to happen. And what happens when we resist things that are up to fate or fortune? Well, we're miserable, right? We're unhappy, we're frustrated, we're stressed out, we're anxious, and ultimately, according to the Stoics, we're miserable. So the Stoics believed that the key to happiness and to a good life was to learn to go with the flow, to learn to accept things that are happening in our lives, even if they're not ideal, even if they're not perfect, to learn to work with them, to learn to adapt and make the most of them. Seneca says this very famously. He says, "What does a man need in order to be happy? To avoid many things, to put up with others, to make use of what comes in handy, to put to good use what falls into his hands, to turn to account what presents itself." So this is a really interesting thing that Seneca is saying here. He is saying that part of what it means to be happy and to live a good life is to have a certain flexibility and adaptability. So sometimes we need to avoid things, sometimes we need to put up with things, right? Sometimes we need to make use of opportunities that come our way. Sometimes we need to adapt to circumstances that we can't control. This is what Seneca is saying here, and this is something that the Stoics believed was very important. They believed that the key to living a good life and to happiness was learning to go with the flow, learning to accept things that are happening in our lives and working with them, adapting to them, making the most of them even if they're not ideal. Marcus Aurelius says this very famously. He says, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." So even when things aren't going our way, even when things are difficult, even when things are challenging, what the Stoics believed was that we could use those things as fuel. We could use those things to make us better, to make us stronger, to make us more resilient. And ultimately, this is what they meant by going with the flow. And this is something that I think we can all learn from the Stoics. I think that the Stoics had a very realistic view of human nature. They knew that we're not perfect. They knew that we're not always going to do the right thing. They knew that we're not always going to be in control, and that is why they believed that it was so important to learn to forgive ourselves when we mess up, to learn to be patient with ourselves when we're struggling, to learn to be kind to ourselves when we're going through a tough time. One of the things that I think the Stoics would say is that we're a very impatient generation. We want everything now, we want it fast, we want it easy, we want it convenient, and we're not willing to wait. And this is something that I think the Stoics would say is a major obstacle to our happiness. Epictetus says this beautifully. He says, "It's our willingness to have things the way we want them that causes our troubles. If we are not willing to have them anyway, we let go of our desire for things to be a certain way and we open ourselves up to all possibilities, then we're free." So I think that this is something that the Stoics would say that we can all learn from them. I think that they had a very realistic view of human nature. They knew that we're not perfect. They knew that we're not always going to do the right thing. They knew that we're not always going to be in control. And that is why they believed that it was so important to learn to forgive ourselves when we mess up, to learn to be patient with ourselves when we're struggling, to learn to be kind to ourselves when we're going through a tough time. But I also think that the Stoics would say that we can learn from them how to deal with the inevitable. They knew that bad things happen to good people. They knew that life is full of suffering, but they also believed that we can learn to deal with that suffering, that we can learn to make the most of it, that we can learn to grow from it, that we can learn to use it as fuel to make us better, stronger, more resilient. And ultimately, I think that this is what the Stoics would say that we can learn from them, that we can learn how to live a good life, even when life isn't going our way. I'm reading a book right now called Letters from a Stoic, and it's a really great book about Stoic philosophy. And in it, the author talks about the differences between Stoicism and Christianity. And I thought it was really interesting because, he is talking about Stoicism, and he is comparing it to Christianity and how they read similar and how they read different. And he makes this one point that I thought was really interesting. He said that one of the main differences between Stoicism and Christianity is that in Stoicism, we focus on what we can control, whereas in Christianity, we focus on what we can't control. So, in Stoicism, we focus on what we can control, on our thoughts, on our actions, on our character, on our and in Christianity, we focus on what we can't control, on God's will, on God's plan, on our salvation, on our relationship with God. And I thought this was really interesting because, I've been studying Stoicism for a long time, and I've never really thought about it in those terms. But I think it's true. I think that one of the main differences between Stoicism and Christianity is that in Stoicism, we focus on what we can control, whereas in Christianity, we focus on what we can't control. But at the same time, there's a lot of similarities, right? There's a lot of overlap. And I think that this is really interesting because I think that both Stoicism and Christianity can teach us a lot about each other. I think that Stoicism can teach us that we need to focus on what we can control. But at the same time, I think that Christianity can teach us that it's okay to let go of the things that we can control and to put our faith in something bigger than ourselves. So, I think that both of these philosophies can teach us a lot about each other. I think that they both have something to offer us. And I think that they both have the potential to make us better people. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the like button. It helps me out a lot. And I will see you in the next video.